based on the drafts I've done so far, which is about 30, there are some bad RBs going way too early in drafts. And you may be thinking about taking some of these guys, but I'm here today to make sure that you don't make that mistake. Instead, I want to help you replace those bad RBs with these 5 instead. And let's start with Joe Mixon, the Bengals running back who currently goes in round 5, and he's going around players like Miles Sanders, Dameon Pierce, J.K. Dobbins. Nothing bad to say about these other running backs. This is a solid range in general to be targeting, but it's just strange to see him going this late because as you can see from his fantasy points per game, the last 3 years, he's been top 10 every single year, and on average is finishing as the running back 7. But now he's going as the 18th RB in drafts, and there's a key reason for this. Because as the title of this NFL.com article states, Bengals RB Joe Mixon was recharged with a misdemeanor and aggravated menacing in April. And basically what this charge boils down to is that he, in February, pointed a firearm at a woman during a road rage incident, you can call it, and he threatened her pretty severely, as it states right here. You could see, "You should be popped in the face, I should shoot you, the police can't get me," is what he was alleged to have said. Now this is pretty serious, and a first-degree misdemeanor is punishable by up to 6 months in jail. Now I understand if you want to completely take him off of your fantasy board, but if we're trying to separate these two things, the alleged case here and fantasy, this is what you need to know. Mixon has pled not guilty to these charges, and the Bengals have actually come out to support Mixon, plus there's a chance a potential punishment wouldn't be given out until after the season. And this is important because Mixon is an extreme value in round 5. Last year he wasn't all that efficient, but he still put up over 1,250 total yards between his rushing and receiving. And he somewhat quietly set a career high with 60 receptions and his targets above 70 last year. But that's not all, because his main competition in Samaje Perine left and he signed with the Denver Broncos, which means that Mixon's competition this year isn't going to be as good, and we could break down the 2 biggest threats to his work share. It would be these 2 players right here: Chase Brown, who is a 5th round rookie, and then Chris Evans, who's been in the league a few years now, but he was a 6th round pick in 2021. Now Brown is an interesting player, the guy they just drafted this year, because of this. These are his workout metrics per player profiler. Anything the higher the bar is towards 100, the better. And he has a 92nd 40 time and 95th burst score, and on the bench, his strength 86th percentile. All those are wildly above average. And Brown was a mega producer at Illinois. He had over 1,100 yards his second to last year as a junior, and then last year as a senior, he ends up going out there 1,600 yards, over 240 receiving yards, and 13 touchdowns. But the downside to Brown is that he's a rookie and he lacks NFL experience, a late round rookie, which is not a proven track record in the NFL. And then there's Chris Evans, a Michigan product who in his 2 seasons, 26 active games in the NFL, he's had a couple of flashy plays, but only 17 career rush attempts. So all of this boils down to that you should take Mixon, assuming that he doesn't miss any time with suspension. He's probably going to be a 3rd round pick in just a few short weeks to months. Next up is Kenneth Walker, the Seahawks running back who saw his value drop this offseason. And the clear reason for that was because the Seahawks selected Zach Charbonnet out of UCLA in the 2nd round with borderline a top 50 overall pick, 52nd overall in the draft. Now a big question about Charbonnet entering the NFL Combine was, is he athletic? Because in college he was a good back, but is he athletic? Well, he tested well above average. 72nd percentile speed, 78th percentile burst. Those are great for a running back entering the NFL. And it gets even better when you look at his production profile. Last year he ends up putting up over 1,300 yards, over 300 rushing yards, nearly 1,700 total yards, 14 touchdowns, and look at this. The receptions column is important here because he set a career high with 37 last year, and this is something that he worked on entering the NFL, knowing that he needed to be more versatile. That's going to be a big point this year to look out for. Now this clearly hurts Kenneth Walker's upside, but the market, your friends, people in general, well, they've officially overreacted to this news. Because Walker now goes in round 5 after guys like TJ Hawkinson and DJ Moore, which I personally think is a mistake. He was going as a 2nd round pick before the NFL draft, and now he's dropped 3 rounds because Zach Charbonnet was drafted. The translation there is there was a time that he was going too early, but now he's not. He's actually going after guys like Najee Harris now. Even though he's extremely more explosive, his 10+ yard runs last year per player profiler, he ended up running for 17 of those, 3rd most in the NFL. And another stat from Player Profiler, his evaded tackles, basically broken tackles, he was top 10 in this metric. And it's impressive that he was top 10 in this metric because he didn't become the starting running back until week 6. But from week 6 on, as you can see from Player Profiler, he was 7th in overall broken tackles, in the same range as guys like Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry and Josh Jacobs. And during those 11 games as a starter, this is what he did. He averaged 15.9 fantasy points, and when you take into account his receptions and rush attempts, his total touches, 20.6, which boils down to Kenneth Walker as a starter last year being 6th in fantasy points. And look at his neighborhood: McCaffrey, Eckler, Jacobs, Henry, and Tony Pollard. He was an elite running back. So here's your takeaway. Yes, 2nd rounder Zach Charbonnet will be involved. He's likely and probably already is a better pass catcher. But Walker only had 27 catches last year, wasn't much of a pass catcher, and still finished 6th in points as a starter. Your takeaway is to consider Walker a steal in round 5 of your fantasy draft. drafts. Next up is a running back who I consider a great pick right now in David Montgomery because he currently goes in round 8 of fantasy drafts. Next to guys like Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, and even Javonte Williams, who might miss half the season. This is a huge mistake. And you can take advantage of this mistake because over the last 3 seasons, his total yardage between his rushing yards and his receiving yards, David Montgomery is averaging over 1,250 total yards. Now let's discuss this more because Montgomery is now a Lion. He signed a 3-year deal worth $18 million this offseason, the second biggest running back contract on the free agent market behind Miles Sanders, which means they're going to be incentivized to feature him a good amount. Now there is a clear concern that we must talk about. The Lions spent their first round pick, a top 12 overall pick, so a significant draft capital, on Jahmyr Gibbs, the running back out of Alabama. And this is concerning because Gibbs was the best pass catching running back in the class. Last year he had 44 receptions for 444 receiving yards for Alabama, and look at his target shares. Anything for a running back above like 8 to 10% is great. His target shares 11, 14, and 13% in college. He is a fantastic pass catcher. Now all this stuff is great for Gibbs. He'll be the pass catching back for sure in Detroit, but there is a big concern. Gibbs is a smaller back. He only weighs 199 pounds. He's 5'9". Now the draft capital kind of offsets this a little, but its odds are he's not going to be the red zone back compared to Montgomery. Quite simply, Montgomery is 225 pounds. He's 26 pounds bigger than Gibbs, which means he has more leverage in the red zone to get into the end zone, which means Montgomery's probably going to take on Jamal Williams' role, a role that had Williams leading the NFL with 45 touches inside the 10, which was 55% more than any other running back. You could see Joe Mixon was second with just 29 touches inside the 10. But that's not all, because this usage led to Jamal Williams leading the NFL for running backs in expected touchdowns. He had 17 expected touchdowns based off his usage, and it just so happened that he actually scored an NFL high 17 touchdowns. Now, we're not going to just assume that Montgomery's going to score 17 touchdowns this year. Obviously, things start to balance out and change year to year, but Montgomery is a better running back than Jamal Williams. Last year, Jamal Williams ranked just 54th in running back efficiency, 50th in yards per touch. But David Montgomery was 20th in this exact same metric. And Montgomery is a better pass catcher as well. He's actually a really capable pass catcher. He was 3rd in yards per reception amongst running backs last year and 10th in yards per route run on his 34 catches. These are great efficiency metrics. He'll probably still be involved in the passing game. Now, all of this makes it kind of easy to see that the takeaway is David Montgomery is the best 8th round pick in fantasy football right now. Now let's talk about Breece Hall, who was a star in 2022 while it lasted. Hall started 4 games last year and averaged 19.7 fantasy points in these contests. It ended up leading to overall yardage between his rushing and receiving of 122 yards, overall touches between his receptions and rush attempts, 18.8 touches. And during this time of his 4 starts, reminder, as a rookie, he was 6th in fantasy points per game, up there with a lot of first round picks in Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffrey, and Saquon Barkley from last year. But then we have to talk about what happened in week 7. It went from being an amazing week to a terrible week. Because in week 7 last year against the Broncos, Breece Hall's first 3 carries went for 72 yards and a touchdown. But then on his 4th carry, he tore his knee. It ended up being an ACL tear, which ended his season. There was also a meniscus tear in there as well, which isn't great. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it isn't great to be tearing multiple things in your knee. And now here's what you need to know about this injury that happened in week 7. We'll consult with our doctor friend on Twitter, Sports MD Analysis, and he says, look, Breece Hall is still an RB1. The average return here is 10 months to return, which 11 months would be week 1. So he should be 100% by week 1. And now I really want you to focus on this last point. Normally it takes 18 months post-injury, there's going to be a dip in production. But since Hall is a young athletic outlier, it's likely that he's going to recover faster. And this information that we just talked about is important to know because Hall goes as the running back 11 in drafts right now. Even though now he has some NFL experience, he was successful last year, goes after guys like Derrick Henry. I'd rather have Breece Hall. Especially when you consider the offense is going to be not just slightly improved this year, but significantly improved. Because this is where the Jets ranked in passing offense last year, 32nd. And there's only 32 teams in the NFL. But now they have Aaron Rodgers. And with Aaron Rodgers at the quarterback position, you can be damn sure they're not going to finish last. And if they're going to have a better offense, more efficient, more red zone drives, and touchdowns for Breece Hall. Now, before we get to another running back in this video who might be the best player we'll talk about in the entire video, I want to let you know about the Fantasy Blueprint. Hundreds of people have already acquired their Fantasy Blueprint this year because, look, if you want to win your fantasy league, it is the tool for you. The Blueprint has all the tools and analysis you need to beat your friends and take home a fantasy championship, and you can get it with the 2 simple steps in the description below. Just follow that link. And it's important that you know that this is risk-free. If you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll refund your minimum deposit of $5 to $10 that it cost you to get the Blueprint this year. Again, this is 100% risk-free. Last year, 99.9% of people didn't reach out because they were making their fantasy playoffs, so go ahead and get your Blueprint down below. All right, now this takes us to Aaron Jones, who last year at this point in 2022 was a 2nd round pick in fantasy. But now he goes as a 5th round pick, and he goes around all these running backs: Kenneth Walker, J.K. Dobbins, Joe Mixon. I'm not going to say anything about any of these guys. All these guys are a value. This is a great spot to be taking running backs this this year. Start with wide receivers and then get your running backs. So here's what you need to know. Despite Aaron Jones dropping 3 rounds, it's not because of his production. Last year, he had over 1,500 total yards and was 12th in yards per touch. The fella even set a new career high with 59 receptions and over 70 targets last year in the receiving game. So why is he going so much later? Well, he has a new quarterback in Jordan Love. No more Aaron Rodgers. Jones has only played 1 game in his career without Aaron Rodgers, which means there's a lot of questions entering 2023. The worst case scenario is already built in. If Jordan Love is bad, the Packers offense is one of the worst in the league, Jones is probably going to be like a 6th round pick, which is basically where he goes right now, around Michael Pittman, J.K. Dobbins, and Justin Herbert. But then the question becomes, what if the Packers offense is just average or even slightly below average? Because this is what it was last year, where Jones finished with 14.6 points per game and he had over 1,500 total yards in what was an average Packers offense. And look, it's not like they added any competition. The only running back they drafted was a 7th round running back in Lou Nichols, so basically no threat there. And they didn't add any guys in free agency, meaning A.J. Dillon is still Jones' only true competition. And here's what Aaron Jones has done the last 2 seasons playing alongside of A.J. Dillon. When they're both active for 32 games, Jones averages 15.2 fantasy points. Between his receptions and rush attempts, he averages 15.5 touches and 84.5 total yards between his rush yards and receiving yards. And this usage makes Jones a top 10 running back during this time, and nothing in his efficiency has shown that even though he's 28.5, that he's slowing down. So you need to stop drafting the bad running backs in your first 6-7 rounds of drafts and take these guys instead. Now, these guys have the potential to be league winners, but if you want to see the 7 best league winner candidates for this year, well, check out this beautiful video right here. That'll ensure you stay 1 step ahead of your friends. And another quick way to do so is by hitting the subscribe video on this channel to have all the info you need to schmack around and beat your friends this year.